Today, homelessness is a persistent and complex issue facing communities and nations around the world. Most people think of homelessness as a modern-day challenge that has only become a major issue in the last few decades, though it would shock many of us to learn that homelessness was also a huge issue in medieval times. To reveal how homelessness affected everyday life in medieval times, let us look at the numbers. According to some researchers, approximately 20% of the medieval population in Europe were destitute and had no home. Even in cities like Florence in northern Italy, the number of paupers was extremely high. Within its population of 100,000 people in 1330 AD, it is estimated that 20,000 or 20% were paupers. Even in late 15th century Vienna, a prosperous city of 20,000 at the time, it was estimated that 2,000 or roughly 10% of its population were outcast from mainstream society. This figure included paupers, the homeless, and beggars. Of course, the percentage of homeless varied according to the location of towns, cities, and countries. Nevertheless, in the Middle Ages, the threat of becoming homeless was constant and far too common. Homeless people were also referred to as paupers, a name which originates from the Latin term for poor. Due to the lack of information on medieval homeless and paupers, they attract little attention from period scholars and researchers. When one considers that even the upper classes of medieval times lacked certain necessities, a medieval homeless person's conditions would be considered horrific. As one can see, homelessness was an even greater challenge in medieval times than the serious issue we face today. So, why was homelessness such a dramatic problem in medieval times? It appears that the massive number of homeless in medieval Europe were the result of three key reasons. The first major reason resulting in the greatest number of medieval homeless was unfortunate economic circumstances. These situations included people harvesting poor crops, losing land through failed commerce, losing employment, and unmanageable debt. In addition, as agricultural methods improved, marginalized farmers that could not adapt lost their livelihoods. If they could not find new locations or settlements to begin anew, they became homeless, which was also called placeless. In addition, we shall mention another economic occurrence which increased the homeless status of peasant farmers, which was the introduction of wages for labor. To landholders that provided their farmers a year's worth of sustenance and land for 4 or 5 months of production, it was an inefficient use of their resources. Through paying workers for labor as needed, they could use their land for more profitable pursuits. With no means to acquire land of their own, these former peasant farmers were cast adrift, seeking employment whenever opportunities arose. Now homeless, they would find shelter in farm buildings, on the sides of streets, or inside disgusting hovels. The second major cause of medieval homelessness were those people treated as outcasts from towns and villages. Typically, they would be forced to live rough outside of town limits with no accommodations because their lifestyle did not conform to the strict social norms of everyday medieval life. These unfortunate people would include widows and orphans that had no one to rely on, criminals, those estranged from their communities, and discharged soldiers with no place to settle. The third key reason for homelessness in medieval times would be physical incapacitation and those people that were mentally challenged. Unfortunate people in this category would include the blind, deaf, those stricken by severe illness, the aged, and people with physical deformities. Numerous people living with mental illnesses of various forms would also endure homelessness, similar to modern times. This massive number of homeless people in medieval Europe survived by traveling many roads, constantly seeking charity and temporary work. If none were available, begging or crime were the dramatic alternatives for survival. A fortunate few would gain employment at a manor home or within an upper-class household, though as a serf they would be employed at the lowest position available. So, how did medieval Europe deal with these extreme numbers of homeless people? During the early to middle stages of the medieval period, the church collected a tithe of 10% based on the annual economic output of the continent. These proceeds were used among other activities to aid the poor and destitute. The church felt a moral obligation to do so, though it is debatable how much of the tithe went to the indigent, since even the poorest of society were made to pay this tithe. At monasteries across the continent, monks would give alms and aid to the poor and homeless. As time progressed, challenges resulting from medieval homelessness increased dramatically, along with the size of the general population. To help deal with these crises, the middle classes, along with wealthy individuals, tried to assist by establishing endowments and charitable organizations. Though with growing displacements of skilled craftspeople around the end of the 12th century, even large numbers of the former middle class became landless. The homeless situation became so frightening that growing numbers of Europeans called on the church to use most of its vast wealth for aiding multitudes of paupers. Unfortunately, at the start of the 14th century, overpopulation on the continent combined with a dramatic climate event resulting in the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317. Around this time, there were so many homeless and roving hordes looking to avoid starvation that a distinction was made. There were the deserving poor, or authentic poor, who were hardworking families that had fallen on difficult times due to sudden changes in circumstances. Alternatively, those thought lazy and practicing vices which led to their downfall became known as the undeserving poor, or false poor. Decades later, the horrendous scourge named Black Death arrived, resulting in a dramatically reduced population, though the homeless perished in greater proportions due to their vulnerability. However, there persisted a scarcity of land for the still significant numbers of displaced persons. Why? The landholding class introduced laws like the Statute of Labourers in 1351 in England to keep control of large landholdings while exploiting the hardship of homeless people as cheap sources for labor. In addition, near the end of the 14th century, the ranks of the paupers class began increasing again with families that were formerly part of the middle class. They too suffered from economic advancements in Europe. There are some researchers that dispute the significant homelessness rate in Europe during medieval times. They state that the tight communities of the Middle Ages had an informal network of community support to keep paupers from homelessness through extended family, friends, churches, or community endowments. Though even they concede this would only happen when the potentially homeless people held good standing within their local community. On the other hand, people that were outcasts, lived in a destitute community, or came from an area ravaged by war or natural disaster could find no local charity. In these situations, you were forced to leave your community, becoming part of a huge problem. These people were called foreign homeless, seeking refuge in places where they were considered an outsider and commonly treated with mistrust and even hatred. Typically, other communities would have their resources stretched caring for their own paupers. Thus, one often became a vagrant, beggar, or outcast, slowly starving in misery before moving on. Due to the almost obsessive interest in conformity during the medieval ages by those relatively few that held immense power, these high numbers of homeless presented key challenges. First, there were potential issues of crime and unruly behavior which had to be controlled by those in authority. Though an even greater worry was the potential for societal upheaval through riots and uprisings, such as the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England. In response to this uprising, laws such as the Vagrancy Act of 1383 attempted to gain control of the pressing problems caused by large numbers of homeless in medieval times. This act gave powers to justices of the peace, county sheriffs, and similar officials in England to apprehend vagrants or beggars to see if their character was of good behavior. Nevertheless, the issue of structural poverty, which resulted in great numbers of homeless and paupers, remained a serious challenge in Europe for decades to follow. Today, if we knew of communities where 1 in 5 people were homeless, it would be considered crises of monumental proportions. People and governments would be compelled to take immediate action using all available modern resources. Though it is almost unimaginable to think of the dire consequences from rampant homelessness in medieval times, when just surviving on a daily basis was a life or death struggle. Thank you for supporting us at Medieval to Modern. Please be sure to watch our next episode or one shown at the end of this video. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and spread the word about this channel so we can create more exciting content. I wish you good tidings as we remember that sharing knowledge has been a noble deed throughout the ages.